Welcome to our deep dive into Buddhist wisdom. You've shared all kinds of teachings and insights with us, and I'm excited to dive in, really try to figure out, how these ancient ideas can still be relevant in our lives today.
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe even find some practical tools for navigating this crazy world we live in.
Yeah.
Ready to get started.
Absolutely. I'm excited. I think these teachings tackle some really big questions about life, suffering, and happiness.
Yeah.
Even our sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating how, these concepts that were developed centuries ago, they still resonate with us so deeply today.
Yeah, for sure. One of the first things that stood out to me going through your notes was this idea of impermanence.
Right.
Like everything is constantly changing, nothing stays the same.
Yes.
I even noticed that you underline a quote here, change is never painful, only resistance to change is painful. What do you think about that? Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, I think that quote really gets to the heart of why we struggle sometimes. We cling to how we think things should be instead of accepting the reality that everything is in flux.
Yeah.
It's like trying to hold on to sand.
Yeah.
The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers.
Right. That's a great analogy. It makes me think about how this all ties into another Buddhist concept, dukkha or suffering.
Yes.
I used to think Buddhism was all about avoiding pain, but it seems like it's more nuanced than that. What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. It's not about denying that pain exists.
Right.
Buddhism acknowledges that pain is a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
We experience physical pain, emotional pain, loss, grief, you name it. It's all part of being human.
Right.
But what Buddhism offers are really tools to manage suffering.
Okay.
Which is often caused by our resistance to that pain.
Okay.
That clinging to the way we think things should be.
So pain is inevitable. Stubbing your toe, feeling heartbroken, these things are going to happen. But suffering is what we add on top of that with our reaction,
Exactly.
so our resistance.
Exactly. And that's where I think we have some agency.
Okay.
We can learn to change our relationship to pain.
Yeah.
To accept it as part of life's tapestry.
Right.
Rather than fighting against it.
Right.
And that's really where I think a lot of these Buddhist teachings come into play.
Okay. So I'm starting to see the connections here. If everything is impermanent and we're clinging to things that are constantly changing, relationships, possessions, ideas about ourselves, then it makes sense that attachment would lead to some degree of suffering when those things inevitably change.
Right. You're exactly right. In your notes, you even highlighted this quote, "The root of suffering is attachment."
Yeah.
It's such a simple statement, but I think it's so profound. Recognizing that attachment is a source of suffering, I think that's the huge first step toward finding more peace and freedom.
So what's the alternative to clinging? How do we start to loosen the grip of these attachments? Is that where this middle way comes in?
The middle way is a key principle in Buddhism, and it's about finding balance, avoiding extremes in all areas of life. And you can think about it like this.
Okay.
If you constantly seek pleasure, you're indulging every desire, it ultimately leads to dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, harsh self-denial,
Right.
deprivation, also create imbalance. So the middle way is about finding that sweet spot,
Okay.
that equilibrium where you can really thrive.
I feel like that reminds me of, all this talk these days about work-life balance, mindful consumption, trying to find moderation in a world of excess. It seems like the middle way is a pretty relevant concept today.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that swinging from one extreme to the other only creates more turmoil and ultimately more suffering. So how can you bring a little more balance into your life? What areas feel out of whack right now?
That's a good question. I definitely struggled with overworking sometimes.
Yeah.
So I'll have to ponder that one a little bit more. But while we're on the topic of finding balance, how does mindfulness fit into all of this?
Mindfulness is a cornerstone of Buddhist practice. And it's about cultivating present moment awareness, paying attention to your thoughts, feelings, sensations without judgment.
Right.
You have a quote highlighted here. "Do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment."
Yeah.
Does that resonate with you?
It really does. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in worries about the past, anxieties about the future.
Right.
And we just miss out on, the richness of right now.
Exactly. And mindfulness is about bringing your full attention to this moment without getting swept away by those thoughts and emotions. It's like training a muscle, learning to observe your inner experience without judgment.
And I'm guessing that's where meditation comes in.
Precisely.
Okay.
Meditation is a key tool for cultivating mindfulness. And there's so many different techniques, but the essence of it is about training your mind to be more present, more aware of your own patterns,
Okay.
thinking and reacting.
So if we can become more mindful of our attachments, maybe we can start to loosen their grip a bit, create some space between ourselves and those things that we're clinging to.
You're catching on very quickly. And mindfulness is just one part of this path. Buddhism also offers this roadmap called the Noble Eightfold Path,
Oh, okay.
which outlines 8 interconnected practices for living a more awakened and ethical life.
A roadmap. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of terrain are we covering here? What are these 8 practices all about?
Essentially, it's about cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mental discipline.
Okay.
And, includes things like right speech,
Yeah.
speaking truthfully and kindly, right action, acting in ways that are skillful and beneficial, and right livelihood, engaging in work that's ethical, aligned with your values.
So it sounds like a pretty holistic approach to living a more conscious and compassionate life.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it all starts with cultivating the right mindset, the right intention. That's why right view and right intention are the first 2 steps on the path. It's about understanding the true nature of reality, understanding the causes of suffering, and setting the intention to live in a way that's aligned with wisdom and compassion.
This is really starting to paint a compelling picture of this Buddhist worldview, but there's one concept that I'm still wrapping my head around, this idea of no self or anatta.
Yes.
If there's no permanent self, then who are we really?
That's a good question.
What resonated with you about that concept?
I think that's one of the most profound and perhaps most challenging concepts in Buddhism. It suggests that what we perceive as ourself, our personality, our identity, it's not this fixed, unchanging entity. It's actually a collection of experiences, thoughts, and emotions that are constantly in flux.
Yeah.
Like everything else, the self is impermanent.
Okay. So if the self is constantly changing, like waves on the ocean, what does that mean for our ego? Is it just another wave, rising and falling?
That's a great way to think about it, yeah. Buddhism sees the ego as that part of us that craves control and seeks validation, that feels separate from everything else. It's the voice in our head that's always comparing and judging and feeding on those attachments we were talking about earlier.
So the ego thrives on those attachments. Like it needs those things to feel secure, to feel like it exists.
Exactly. And the more we feed the ego, the more demanding it becomes, leading to that cycle of craving and dissatisfaction. But the good news is we don't have to be ruled by the ego.
Okay.
We can learn to observe its patterns, see it for what it is, and make choices that are aligned with our deeper values rather than its fleeting demands.
In my notes, I underline this quote: "To conquer oneself is a greater task than conquering others." It makes me wonder, is it even about conquering the ego or more about understanding it, maybe even befriending it?
Befriending the ego. I love that. I think that's a really insightful way to approach it. It's not about eradicating the ego entirely, but rather becoming aware of its influence, learning to work with it rather than against it.
So it's about recognizing those ego-driven thoughts and behaviors without judging ourselves for having them.
Exactly. It's about cultivating self-compassion,
Okay.
which is another key principle in Buddhism.
We've talked a lot about compassion for others, but what does self-compassion actually look like in practice?
It's about treating yourself with the same kindness, understanding, and forgiveness that you would offer to a loved one. Recognizing that you, like everyone else, are imperfect and making mistakes is part of being human. It's about silencing that inner critic and replacing it with a more supportive, nurturing inner voice.
It's like giving yourself permission to be human, with all the flaws and imperfections that come with it.
Yes. And that acceptance is so freeing. It allows us to learn from our mistakes without beating ourselves up, to pick ourselves up when we fall and keep moving forward on the path.
So cultivating self-compassion isn't about becoming self-indulgent or ignoring our flaws. It's about treating ourselves with the same understanding and care that we would offer to, anyone else who is struggling.
Absolutely. And it's also about recognizing that we're not alone in our struggles. One of the core practices in Buddhism is called metta, or loving kindness.
I remember seeing that in my notes, but I wasn't quite sure what it meant. What is loving kindness exactly?
It's a beautiful practice that involves cultivating feelings of love, compassion, and goodwill, first towards yourself and then extending it outwards to others. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, our interconnectedness, even with those who might seem different from us,
Yeah.
or those we might even consider difficult.
It sounds like a really powerful antidote to the division and conflict we see so much of in the world today.
It really is. And in your notes, you highlighted this quote: hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What are your thoughts on that?
It's such a simple statement, but so profound. It reminds me that meeting negativity with more negativity only perpetuates the cycle of suffering. It's about choosing a different path, choosing to respond with love and compassion, even when it's difficult.
Exactly. And this ties back to the Buddhist principle of interconnectedness.
Okay.
It's the understanding that we're all part of this vast web of life.
Yeah.
And our actions, thoughts, even intentions have ripple effects that extend far beyond ourselves.
It's like that analogy we talked about earlier, throwing a pebble into a pond and watching the ripples spread out.
Right.
Our actions, no matter how small, they have an impact on the world around us.
That's a great way to visualize it. And this understanding of interconnectedness can be incredibly empowering, because it reminds us that we each have the capacity to create positive change.
So it's not just about personal enlightenment or, escaping suffering. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness and living in a way that benefits the whole.
You got it. And that brings us to another important aspect of Buddhist teachings: understanding desire and its role in our experience of happiness and suffering.
Right. I remember underlining this quote: contentment is the greatest wealth. I feel like that speaks volumes about the Buddhist view of desire.
It does. And Buddhism doesn't say that all desire is bad.
Okay.
It recognizes that some desires are healthy and they can motivate us to grow and learn.
Right.
But the kind of desire that leads to suffering is the kind that's rooted in craving,
Right.
in a constant sense of lack, dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
It's that feeling that we'll finally be happy when we achieve this goal, acquire that possession, reach a certain status.
It's like we're always chasing after something, never fully content with what we have in this moment, always striving for more, bigger, better. I know I'm guilty of that.
I think we all fall into that trap sometimes, part of the human condition. But Buddhism offers us tools to step out of that cycle of craving and find more contentment in the present moment.
And I'm guessing that's where gratitude comes in. Remembering to appreciate what we already have rather than constantly focusing on what we lack.
Gratitude is a powerful antidote to craving and discontent. It's about shifting your focus from what you're missing to what you already have, no matter how small.
I remember highlighting a quote about that too. Let us rise up and be thankful, for if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. It's like a reminder to find something, anything to be grateful for each day.
Exactly. And those small moments of gratitude can really add up over time, shifting our whole outlook on life.
So if gratitude is the antidote to craving, how do we actually cultivate more gratitude in our daily lives? Do you have any tips?
One practice that can be really helpful is keeping a gratitude journal. Each day, take a few moments to write down 3 to 5 things that you're grateful for. It could be something as simple as a warm cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, a kind word from a friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
So simple, just taking a few moments to appreciate the simple things.
Exactly. And you might be surprised by how this simple practice can shift your perspective and make you more aware of the abundance that already exists in your life.
So it's not about denying our desires or pretending that everything is perfect. It's about finding a more balanced relationship with the desire, recognizing that true happiness comes from within, rather than constantly chasing after external things.
Beautifully said. And this inner contentment, this inner peace, is also cultivated through living with intention.
We talked about that earlier, in the context of the Eightfold Path, but I'd love to explore it a bit further. What does it mean to live with intention?
It's about aligning your actions with your values, making choices that are consistent with your deepest aspirations, asking yourself, what kind of life do I want to create? Or what kind of person do I want to be? And then making choices that reflect those values.
So it's not just about going through the motions, it's about bringing awareness and purpose to everything we do.
You got it. And you highlighted a quote that really speaks to this. Your purpose in life is to find your purpose and give your whole heart to it.
It's about finding what truly lights you up and dedicating yourself to it fully. But what about the times when we make choices that aren't aligned with our values? When we, mess up or fall short, how does Buddhism address that?
Well, that's where the concept of karma comes in.
Ah, yes. Karma.
Oh.
It's often oversimplified to what goes around comes around, but I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
There is. Karma is essentially about understanding the law of cause and effect. It's the recognition that our actions, both mental and physical, have consequences. But it's not about punishment or reward. It's more about understanding that our actions create ripples that affect ourselves and the world around us.
So it's about taking responsibility for our actions and understanding that they have an impact both on ourselves and on others.
Exactly. And that can be a really empowering realization because it reminds us that we have the power to create positive change.
You underline this quote in your notes. What you think, you become. What you feel, you attract. What you do, you create. What do you make of that?
I think that quote really speaks to the power of our thoughts, feelings, and actions to shape our reality. It reminds us that we're not just passive recipients of fate, but active creators of our own experience.
So even when we make mistakes, we can learn from them, make amends if necessary, and make different choices in the future. We're not defined by our past actions, but we have the power to choose differently in this moment.
That's a really insightful way to put it. And this brings us back to that idea of inner peace that we were talking about earlier.
Right. We talked about how true happiness and fulfillment come from within, but how do we actually cultivate that inner peace in the midst of life's inevitable challenges?
One of the most powerful tools for cultivating inner peace is, of course, meditation.
We've touched on meditation a few times, but I'm curious to learn more about how it actually works. Like what happens when we meditate?
In essence, meditation is about training the mind to be present, to quiet the constant chatter of thoughts, and cultivate a deeper awareness of our inner experience. It's about creating a space of stillness and clarity within ourselves, even amidst the chaos of life.
It sounds incredibly valuable, especially in today's fast-paced world where we're constantly bombarded with distractions. But I have to admit, I've tried meditation before, and I really struggle to quiet my mind. Any tips for beginners?
The key is to be patient with yourself. Don't expect to achieve a state of perfect stillness right away. It's a practice, and like any skill, it takes time and effort to develop. Start with just a few minutes each day and gradually increase the duration as you feel more comfortable.
So it's about consistency and just showing up for yourself, even when it feels challenging.
Exactly, and you might be surprised by how even a few minutes of meditation each day can start to have a positive impact on your overall well-being.
I'm feeling inspired to give it another try. But even with meditation, there are still going to be times when life throws us curveballs. You know, when we face challenges that are beyond our control, how can we find that inner peace in those moments?
Buddhism offers this really powerful teaching about acceptance.
Okay.
Right, we've talked about accepting impermanence, accepting that everything is in constant flux.
Right.
But how does acceptance help us to find peace when we're facing difficult situations? Well, the teaching suggests that a lot of our suffering comes from resisting reality, from fighting against what is. Remember that quote we discussed earlier, let go or be dragged. It's a powerful image, isn't it?
It really is. It makes me think about all the times that I've clung to how I thought things should be, only to end up creating more suffering for myself.
I think we've all been there. But this acceptance doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on our goals. It's about recognizing that there are certain things in life that are simply beyond our control, and that struggling against them only creates more pain.
So it's about finding that balance between taking action when appropriate and surrendering to what is when necessary.
Exactly. And that surrender can be incredibly liberating because it frees us from the mental and emotional turmoil of resisting what we cannot change. It allows us to focus our energy on what we can influence and to find peace in the midst of uncertainty.
So acceptance isn't about giving up. It's about choosing our battles wisely and finding peace within ourselves, regardless of external circumstances.
Beautifully said. And you know, this acceptance ties back to that core teaching about happiness coming from within.
Right. We've talked about that a lot, but I'd love to hear your take on it. What are some of the key insights Buddhism offers on cultivating this inner happiness?
Well, one of the most important is the practice of mindfulness, which we discussed earlier. By cultivating present moment awareness, we can step out of that constant cycle of craving and dissatisfaction that often keeps us from experiencing true contentment.
It's about learning to appreciate what we have rather than always striving for something more.
Precisely. And this ties into the practice of gratitude, which is another powerful tool for cultivating inner happiness.
Right, we were talking about maybe keeping a gratitude journal or just taking a moment each day to reflect on the things we're thankful for.
Yeah, exactly. By focusing on the good in our lives, no matter how small, we can shift our perspective from lack to abundance. And that can have a profound impact on our, sense of well-being.
It's like training our minds to focus on the positive rather than dwelling on the negative. But what about when things are really tough? When we're going through a major loss or dealing with a lot of stress? Can gratitude really help in those moments?
That's a really important question. And I think in those difficult moments, gratitude can be the most challenging, but also the most transformative. It's not about denying the pain or pretending that everything is okay.
Right.
It's about finding those glimmers of light, those small things that still bring us joy, even amidst the darkness.
So maybe it's about appreciating, a warm shower or a supportive friend or even just a moment of quiet amidst the chaos.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Those small things can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes the gratitude might be simply for the fact that we're still here, still breathing, still able to experience life, even with all of its challenges.
Yeah. That's a beautiful perspective.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how Buddhism views death. We often try to avoid thinking about death, but it seems like Buddhism really encourages us to contemplate our own mortality. Why is that?
That's right. In Buddhism, death isn't seen as something to be feared, but rather as a natural part of life.
Okay.
And reflecting on mortality can actually be a very powerful practice for bringing more awareness and intention to our lives.
I remember underlining this quote in my notes. The trouble is you think you have time. It's kind of a wake-up call, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It reminds us that our time here is precious and that we don't know how much time we have left. And by recognizing that, it can help us to prioritize what truly matters.
Right.
And make the most of each moment.
So it's not about being morbid or dwelling on death, but rather using that awareness of our own mortality to inspire us to live more fully. To make choices that are aligned with our values.
Exactly. And it can also help us to let go of some of those attachments that we've been talking about. When we recognize that everything is impermanent, including our own lives, it can make those things that we cling to seem a little less important.
Yeah. It's like gaining a new perspective, seeing things from a wider lens. And that perspective can help us to find more peace, even in the face of uncertainty and loss.
You put it beautifully. And, this idea of embracing impermanence, accepting change, finding peace within ourselves, it's all part of this larger tapestry of wisdom that Buddhism offers.
It's been an incredible journey exploring these teachings with you. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but I'm already feeling inspired to learn more and maybe incorporate some of these practices into my own life.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, Buddhism isn't about becoming a Buddhist or adopting a rigid set of beliefs.
Right.
It's more about a way of life, a path of ongoing learning and transformation.
It's about cultivating those qualities of wisdom, compassion, mindfulness, and gratitude within ourselves and letting those qualities guide our actions in the world.
Beautifully said. And as we conclude our deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. How can you bring a little more awareness, a little more kindness, and a little more presence into your life today?
That is a great question to reflect on. And with that, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Buddhist wisdom. Thank you for joining us on this journey. I hope these insights have inspired you to find more peace, happiness, and meaning in your own life. Until next time.